Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How's it going? It is, and how are you doing, as a matter of fact? What a change. What? I've changed the beginning of the show. That's outrageous. All right, well, hey, how are you doing? It is Thursday, April 4th, 2024. Believe it or not, we've made it that far into the future. And how are you doing? Time for another show. Time for us to get things together. Let's not mess with any of the catchphrases of the show, shall we? I don't know. They aren't even, they're not registered trademarks or anything. It's just, that's what naturally comes out. So, hey, anyway, time to catch up with how you're doing today. Why don't you do the show if you're so good at it? Hey, come on. All right. Well, anyway, Greg Dworkin is getting ready to do the show and has been filling out the raft of stories. They're coming in as we speak. And, oh, yes, look at this. Justice, who's been watching developments in the real news, well, the news that's close to home, notes, I did see this yesterday. I mean, I don't think this means anything for anybody, but it's on his mind, and it's not kind of on my mind, too. I guess Elon Musk, who knows what's motivating it, but over at Twitter, I guess he's realizing the place is turning into a dead zone, or maybe he thinks people are actually right, and everybody except the Nazis and weirdos have run away from Twitter, or at least are shifting their attentions elsewhere. And I don't know, I guess someone must have convinced him that it had something to do with, or could be somehow mitigated or reversed by giving back blue check marks to the people who used to have them because they had been verified, because Twitter had gone through some sort of process to figure out that this person was, in fact, who they said they were. And it was supposed to be some sort of label of, certainly a level of trust that the person was, in fact, the person that they said they were. Whether or not you were supposed to trust what they had to say, that was still up to you. But at any rate, that was some sort of currency at Twitter before he bought it and wrecked it. And then he turned it into a rent-a-blue checkmark thing, and nobody knew what the hell it meant. And then all the people who had earned, I guess, or been handed or asked for blue checkmarks just because, whether that was because they were celebrities in some cases, or they just were people who had built a reputation on Twitter and were interested in protecting it, whatever the reasoning was. They had the blue check marks. Elon has started putting those check marks back on people's accounts from which they had been removed because they weren't paying the fee. And then, of course, it now turns out that people are getting these check marks put back on their accounts, some of them not even noticing because they're not active on Twitter, and they're saying, hey, this makes it look, it's the total opposite now. He's totally destroyed the cachet of the blue check mark. There are people who want to hide the blue check mark, and apparently there's even a setting in the settings over at Twitter where you can hide the blue check mark lest anyone think that you had paid Elon Musk for the privilege of displaying the check mark. No one wants to think that. So if we force the blue check mark back on you and you don't want to be associated with Elon Musk, we'll give you a button that can turn it off. I'm surprised he allowed the engineers to do that. Well, all right. I don't know. That's just sort of weird and of interest, but not one of the top movers of news today, but definitely something that's kind of close to home. And I did see that, and I wondered at the time, am I going to have occasion to mention this? And now I do. And Greg Dworkin is fed up with the fact that I've wasted this amount of time on this meaningless item from Twitter, although, I don't know, it intrigued me too, although I haven't been back. I did turn it on to see, did they slap a blue check mark on anybody? I don't know, did it happen to you, Greg? It didn't happen to me, but I never had one in the first place. But good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. No, they haven't put one on me yet.
Okay.
It's interesting.
It's a weird tactic.
People I follow who suddenly had their check mark back said, wait a minute, I don't want this.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I mean, That's
I mean, it used to be something, and now it's useless. So, like, now you're
less
just
than.
calling me a Nazi. I don't want to be a Nazi.
Yeah, it's less than useless. It's actually harmful. I mean, I don't know. I thought it was a great measure. It's not an important thing per se, but it was a great measure of how badly Elon Musk has damaged the reputation of Twitter. That there's a button that you can use to hide it.
Well,
Is an acknowledgement
That's
of
one
that.
way to look at it, certainly. Probably the correct way.
Good.
Another way to
No
look
other
at
ways
it, though,
then. Oh, all
is,
right.
well,
Tell
I'm
me an
very
incorrect way.
conservative.
What? Who is?
I am.
You are?
Yeah, I don't really thrill to see changes in
I
my
see.
social media.
Okay, so like yell at cloud kind of conservative.
Like, I never liked it when the front page of Daily Kos changed. I still use the old front page. It's just more comfortable with it.
Okay,
It's like 10 years,
I
but
do
I
that
still
too.
use it. Right?
All right, I'm
and
conservative.
Twitter,
I
I
guess
liked Twitter. I don't like calling it X. I don't like it when
Oh no, it doesn't make any sense.
you went
I
from
don't do it.
verified to now all of a sudden, if you're verified, it means you're a paid shill or
Yeah,
a paid
you
shill
jerk.
or a Nazi or whatever. And then now they want to give back. I just wish they would just leave it alone.
Okay, all right. In that sense,
Skype is changing.
yes. All right, I'm a conservative
Right?
there.
All of a sudden,
I don't like it.
Skype is starting to give me little tidbits of information like it was Twitter. I don't want it.
Yeah.
And then
Totally
there's
agree.
this panel on the left. The panel on the right is the stuff I send you in the list that we make.
Yeah.
The panel on the left is the choices of chats and channels and calls I can make. I don't want to see that in the middle of the show. And in their newest update, you can't get rid of it.
Yes, I am. I'm experiencing that now, and there are some extra chats that I want to have, and they're being displaced by the suggestion that I have a chat about Formula One racing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Skype today.
go talk to MMA. I don't want to. Media Matters for America. I like him, but I don't want to talk to him right now.
Yeah, like he doesn't want to talk to me either.
And then they give me Skype today. Disney shareholders reject activist
something.
shareholder.
I reject this.
Takeover. That's nice. I don't care.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want it right now.
It did start with the Bing AI chatbot a couple weeks ago. They started to say, hey, a chatbot wants to talk to you. That's interesting. No one wants to talk to the chatbot. The chatbot will talk.
You.
Right. In artificial intelligence Soviet Union, chatbot talk to you. Well, the chatbot is always supposed to talk
days,
to me, but never mind.
Just, I like it the way I like it. I don't. If I want change, I'll institute the change. I don't want you doing it for me.
Right.
And so now every time
grumble.
and I see it now. Skype wants to update. I don't know if I want to. I didn't like the last update.
Go ahead and do it. But don't bother me with it. Listen, yeah, all right. You are conservative in that sense. All right.
In that sense, right?
Right.
Anyway, so another way
progressive.
that I'm conservative is
Please add more crime.
I don't believe that it's really important to perseverate on every single poll that comes out these days.
Oh.
The polls show the
Yes.
election's relatively close. It also shows people aren't really focusing on it. It also shows that people think Robert F. Kennedy is a Kennedy. The old style Kennedy, and they have no idea who he is. And they also show pretty much nothing, although they show that Biden and Trump are essentially tied. And so the only purpose in focusing on polls right now is to see how it's going to affect the media narrative, because the media can't quit them. So that's why it was interesting that one of the better pollsters in America at the MU Marquette University Law Poll.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Just came out with a poll this morning that was done over the last few days. Biden 52, Trump 48 nationally. And what's interesting about that is Trump was +4 last month. So that's 8 points in Biden's favor, basically since the State of the Union.
And they weren't comparing Biden to the Trump stock price or anything like that.
Right, and they weren't comparing Biden to Mother Teresa or,
Oh, yes.
FDR.
Right, or RFK Jr. Even you're supposed to compare them, and they won't do it.
So, I thought that was pretty good. And also, by the way, the Biden campaign has 3 times the amount of money, cash on hand, that Trump has. So
fewer
Trump
trials.
has enough to do a campaign, although a lot of it's going to be siphoned into his legal fees. And, soon enough, the New York trial, which is a criminal trial, will start.
Yes, we're about 11 days from the set start date.
And that's going to be a big deal. I think the civil trials, although they've been put on hold because he's appealing and such, that really still matter. I think that, Trump is not going to do well going forward because there's going to be a lot on his plate. And I think Biden's going to do okay. But in that regard, there are some things we do need to talk about.
All right. This is a great place to do it.
Yep. My pipes will only allow me to do it for a half hour today, but,
okay.
we should talk about it.
Sure.
First of all, this is something out of Dan Pfeiffer's message box. And he points out there's some interesting going-ons in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln. All right. Yeah, that came up yesterday.
Yeah. Did you talk about it?
No. You did. I think you mentioned it, but...
Yeah, they're trying to rig the Electoral College.
Yes. Okay.
Getting rid of the one electoral vote that generally goes blue in the middle of red Nebraska. And part of the way they're doing this, trying to get a veto-proof majority, and part of the way they did this is having a conservative change parties so that now the Republicans have the requisite number of votes.
Okay.
However, that conservative, who was censured by the party because he's pro-abortion, anti-abortion.
I see.
Anti-choice.
Right.
Said, I'm still a Democrat. I'm conservative, but I'm still a Democrat, and I'm not voting for this change suggested by the Republicans that would get rid of the one electoral vote and make all of Nebraska give all of the votes to whoever wins, like most other states except Maine do it.
Yeah, the winner-take-all system of awarding electoral votes to the popular vote winner, allegedly, of that state.
Of that district.
Yeah, but they do it by
and
congressional
the district vote could be different than the overall vote. So when you have 4 electoral votes, 3 can go one way, 1 can go the other. The reason that that's important is that if Biden wins Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, but fails to pick up Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, that one electoral vote means he gets 270 and Trump gets 268. But if you eliminate it, then it's a 269 tie. That goes to the House, and the House would vote for Trump. That's the theory.
Yeah, I mean, you got to win electoral votes still.
Yeah, all of that has to happen. Trump has to win in Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona. Biden
as
has
a convict.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. That's less of a stretch, I think. So first of all, I'm not sure that happens.
Yes.
But second of all, and I think more importantly, Maine is right now a bluish state, not blue like Rhode Island.
Well, it's white now because it's snowing. But yeah, gotcha.
But the point is, if Nebraska did this, Maine would say, "Okay, we're doing it too." Screw you.
Would they?
And if they told Nebraska that, what's the point of doing it?
I don't know.
So I'm not so sure this is going forward. And if it does, I'm not so sure it has the impact people want it to, because they want a story. They don't want to talk about Trump-Biden. They want something else.
It is interesting.
Something else.
I mean, it's a great process story in general.
I'd rather talk about New Jersey getting rid of the county line. But,
that's a good
hey,
one,
if you want to talk about this, fine.
Well, we don't have to go much further with it, but it makes for an interesting process story. And it is kind of, I'm just sort of, it's illustrative, I guess, of how far are Republicans willing to go over one electoral vote. I mean, that is kind of odd. And to think we're going to change the structure of who's president with this one vote.
The other side of the coin, of course, is the projection of Republicans. Every time Trump says it's rigged and they cheat, the Republicans rig and cheat the election.
Right.
Every single time.
Yeah, they can't just let things be. They're not very conservative.
Well, because they'd lose, and they hate losing. And so as long as they're in power, they're going to try to rig it so that they don't lose. That's what happened in Wisconsin for like a decade.
Right. And it happens.
And
it began happening in other states. Now. Yeah. If we lose the governorship, we'll change the nature of the governorship.
Right. All of a sudden, the governor doesn't have any power.
Yeah.
I mean, they cheat.
Yeah, and I don't know why they're bothering.
How can you say that Trump, tried to steal the election when Democrats are always saying Republicans, because Republicans do cheat?
Yeah, well, I don't know what to tell you. You keep
telling
both
me what sides. Well, no. Republicans cheat, and then Republicans accuse Democrats of cheating when they don't. Right. And that's not both sides. And that's part of the problem you have when trying to cover this. Like, well, I want to be fair. Well, tell the frickin' truth if you want to be fair.
That might be something.
You don't want to be fair.
That's right.
You want eyeballs on the other side. That's why Kristen Welker is the way she is. That's why Meet the Press is the way she is. That's why the NBC hired Ronna McDaniel. It's all for access because they don't want to lose Republican voters. Why not just say it? Why not just tell the truth? Because that's really not your job as a journalist. But this isn't journalism. This is infotainment. And it has been ever since Roone Arledge, combined news and entertainment and sports into one division. I mean, it's been the downhill of broadcast journalism ever since.
Yes. You've blamed him for this in the past. So,
well, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So what's happening here? Republicans are trying to cheat because they're afraid they're going to lose. And then if Democrats say you're cheating, then Republicans will say, well, that, you always say Trump is wrong when he says that, but like everybody. No, it's the same thing. You think everybody's like you. You think everybody cheats. You think everybody tries to rig it, and then you accuse your opponents of doing what you yourself are doing, but your opponents are not doing.
Right.
And so it's really important to make that clear.
That is true, and people point to it every time and say projection. We have our catchphrase, or I have mine anyway, of every Republican accusation is a confession. Anytime they,
pretty much.
And they keep proving it over and over again, and they seem pretty well. I hope that it doesn't. I guess I hope it doesn't work out for them in Nebraska because I love to see their plans foiled. But yeah, you're right. It might be of no consequence in the end.
Yeah. In any case, I am reasonably confident, but far from certain that Biden will win this election.
Okay.
Well, you can't be certain because it's too far away, and you can't be certain because in some ways we're a divided nation. But I think the accumulation of all these trials is going to matter to Trump, and I do think he's deteriorating, and I don't think he can keep up.
I certainly hope so, and it would be fun if not only did he lose the election. Well, of course, on the electoral votes, but if the margin widens in the popular vote as well, and I think it also will mean something if there's even any inkling of a chance that Trump could put together anything close to a challenge on the electoral vote side, but loses the popular vote. If we get to where he's lost by 10 million, if we can get to double digits. I think that also may turn the tide in terms of all right, this electoral college thing is just stupid. We got to get rid of it. It's ridiculous. Can't lose an election by 10 million votes and maybe win.
Right. And I do think his deterioration is really starting to substitute words when he gives his rants.
Oh.
If it goes on too long.
People said I could use either one.
Yeah, people said I could use either one. I meant to say election, and I said, Smuckers.
Oh, well.
I just, stuck it in there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense when you read it, but don't worry. The media, print media especially, will clean it up.
Yeah.
The broadcast media won't show it, and the print media will print what they thought I should have said
Brackets,
as if I were coherent.
Election. Right. Sure. Great. That's
because Biden is drooling and stuck in his basement.
Yeah.
And what did you say? Every accusation is a confession?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every Republican accusation is a confession. I trademarked that. I didn't.
Here's another one.
Like to say I did. Yeah.
Here's another one when they say that Biden, can't hold it together. Well, guess what? It's another confession.
Right. Just start waiting. I'm just waiting for them to say that Biden smells bad. Then we can
cheats at golf.
Story. Yeah. All right. By not playing.
Mm.
Yeah. Well. Sure. Why not? Go ahead. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all.
All right. Meanwhile, the other big story, I think, is dynamics in the Middle East.
Okay.
It was a horrible, terrible thing that Israel killed workers at the World Kitchen Organization.
Yes.
Terrible.
World Central Kitchen. Right.
And as a result of that and some other dynamics, protests against Netanyahu's government are still growing. There's still the issue of what they're going to do about the draft for the yeshiva students.
Uh-huh.
And Benny Gantz, who is a ex-general opposition party in a wartime coalition government, said for the first time, possibly because his own support is losing because he's seen as too close to Netanyahu, said, we need to have elections in September this year.
All right.
They're call for new elections for another couple of years, and Netanyahu would like to put it off forever.
Sure.
And Gantz said, no, you have to have elections in September. And if you don't, we'll pull out of the government in May next month.
So, well, that's interesting. I mean, I guess he believes that if someone commits to elections in September, they'll stick to it.
Yeah.
Huh.
So,
that's
if you call for it, you call for it. Then you can't call it off.
All right.
Right, you can not call for it.
Well,
say, yeah, in theory I do it, but I haven't formally announced it. That's one thing. But if you actually announce it, then you're having that election.
Well, other people can react to it when you don't, certainly, and it would be a huge hit for they're the only democracy in the middle. Well, they're not having any elections. Maybe they're not a democracy. Oh.
Well, how they handle these protests suggests they're more like Erdogan than they are, an actual democracy. But.
Yes.
In any case, it's a big deal that this is happening. So the New York Times is covering that front page story. Netanyahu faces challenges from the U.S. and at home. Biden's obviously quite upset about the World Center Kitchen strike and the Rafah projected incursion, which still hasn't happened.
I'm glad that it's being delayed. Every day they delay it is a day that something might happen and it won't go forward.
Yeah, or at least not during the month of Ramadan.
Yeah, right.
So,
whatever it takes.
Supposedly, Biden and Netanyahu are supposed to speak next week. The way the Israeli press covers it, this is from Haaretz. Benny Gantz, who held a press conference Wednesday evening after a long period of silence, did so as polls indicate that public support for Gantz's National Unity Party is eroding. He recognizes his party is beginning to lose the basis of his legitimacy and as an alternative to the government, because he's in the government. That's why most of his remarks are directed at the prime minister, his ministers, and the corridors of power, and even the police's violent conduct, because they were violent against protesters.
Yes.
And only a handful at the minority who behaved violently at the demonstration. So he yelled at the people in power, not the violent minority.
Okay.
For the first time, he called for elections to be held as early as September. If Netanyahu rejects the proposal, the National Unity Party will withdraw from the government at the beginning of the summer session in the second half of May. So that's where things stand there. But the point is, again, there's a lot of pressure that's mounting, and it's not going away, and it's not being managed. And there's no pressure valve letting it off. It's just getting worse and worse and worse for Netanyahu.
Yes, that appears to be the case. The protests are rising, but as you mentioned, I mean, police are breaking them up with water cannons, which I don't know if anybody's told them, but there's a negative connotation to breaking up your protests with water cannons. But we have had that experience. Let us just tell you a little bit about it. It doesn't go over well, but that is it. I mean, although I have been reading something else, I did see something in Haaretz the other day that was interesting, and that the protests against Netanyahu are rising, but at the same time, they're not seeing any change in support for the idea that this war ought to be being waged. They just don't like Netanyahu or the way he's doing it.
Well, they don't like the fact that he's not prioritizing rescuing the hostages, but they're really not fond of Hamas, and they don't endorse what happened on October 7th.
Well, no one endorses that, but not even, I don't know if Hamas would, if they had to do over again. They say they would, but
But if you ask Israeli public opinion, should they finish the war? Should they go ahead and do the Rafah incursion? And they say yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's rough.
You have to take Hamas out.
Yes. So, I mean, there's protest, but...
And it's part of the reason why it's very difficult for the U.S. to say to Israel, okay, don't do this, and Israel says, well, all right. That's not how it works. First of all,
right. That's
not a client state where you can tell them what to do. You can put pressure, but you can't tell them what to do. And second, what they want to do internally is not what you want.
That is also true. It is extraordinarily complicated, and, I mean... Yeah, we'll find out. Well, maybe we won't. That's one of the things. It's not always open to inspection among the American electorate what the hell is motivating stuff like this behind the scenes, and I know people are yelling, well, why don't you just cut off weapons, cut off aid, whatever, and I think we've been through it enough times in a number of other subjects that why don't you just approach to governance rarely, makes any sense inside the room.
Right. Yeah. The other side of the coin is if you don't listen to me, I'm not voting for you.
Okay. There you go.
That's legitimate. Totally.
Yeah.
But if you go and have a meeting with those folks at the White House, like just what just happened, and in the middle of the meeting you get up and walk out because your stated reason for doing so, again, at the White House after you've been invited, which is kind of a big deal, to turn around and walk out and say, I wanted them to understand what it's like when nobody listens to you. That was the stated reason for getting up and protesting.
That's not great.
Stupidest thing in the world. This is one of those, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get attention to yourself, or are you actually trying to,
it may well be it.
Evince change? Because if you want them to listen to you, you don't turn your back on them and walk out. You listen to them.
Yes. Sometimes that's hard to do when you learn things that you don't like when you listen to them, and maybe you don't want to go to the meeting for that reason.
Well, then
that's
don't be there. But,
yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of accepting a meeting and then doing that is basically saying they're never going to talk to me again because there's no reason to. I've shown them that I have no interest in listening.
It would be like saying I agree to have elections in September and then not doing it. And people would say, why am I talking to you?
Anyway, so this is reminding me of a piece that Nicholas Grossman wrote a couple of months ago. Trump's overrated peace plan helped enable the horrors in Israel and Gaza. And that's true. So there's a whole lot of dynamics going on here.
There are
more to come.
Okay. All right. And is that piece in the queue here?
Yes, it is.
All right, we can take a look at it. And
second to last.
Yeah. Well, you let me know during the break whether we should expect you again next hour or next week.
Monday.
Okay.
I'm already dropping breaks.
Okay. My goodness. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So yes, time for a break for Greg, and he's actually, not only has he pointed me to the article that he wanted to get to, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, here's a good plug for the show. The content is so compelling that even as Greg is acknowledging, I really got to get out of here and take a break, he's saying, there's one more story that I really want to cover here, and I'm running out of time, and the music plays, and I can only go half an hour, and then all of a sudden half an hour is gone. Well, I really can't go any further, but there's so much more I want to tell you. So he's not only sent the excerpt on, or rather the article on, but also an excerpt that will highlight the most important part, and that could be a real time saver. This is, although, I always like to parse through every line of an article in case there's something else we can extract from it, but I also like to hit a lot of topics, and that's even higher on my list here. But Trump's overrated peace plan, it is said here, helped enable the horrors of horrors in Israel and Gaza. And again, let me click through to make sure I have the authorship correct here. Nicholas Grossman, because that's correct, because in Pocket it very often misattributes. And it's not, I don't think it's just the Daily Beast where that happens, but it frequently does happen. Like the Pocket says it's Elizabeth Brockway. I don't know. Maybe she's the author of the next piece in the queue or the prior piece in the queue over at Daily Beast, and it just strips the information wrong. But This should be interesting. And I wondered about whether someone was going to cover something like this, because the idea that Trump even had a peace plan is ridiculous. Of course, what they did have was the Jared Kushner deal, in which he secured a deal for himself. The Abraham Accords. They gave it a name and made it sound like it was really super important, but they basically negotiated trade channels, opening up trade channels between Arab states who were no longer at war, in an actual state of war, technical state of war, with Israel, and said, maybe we can have some direct flights in between these countries and or facilitate some trade between these countries, which probably means, intelligence applications, quite honestly. Israeli intelligence applications being sold to the governments, repressive governments in the Gulf states. Hooray! Anyway, now they're able to do that, and also buy expensive condos in one another's wealthy enclaves, I guess. And that was supposed to be a peace plan, except it didn't facilitate peace where there had previously been a state of war. And it exacerbates things, of course, by telling the Palestinians the rest of the Arab world doesn't actually, care to stay in a state of war with Israel over you and your fate. But that may or may not be what is being concentrated on in here. Although now I'm getting more messages. I should go and take. Oh, it's a different angle on things to add to this. All right. So Greg sends us this excerpt, and maybe I'll read you the lead paragraph here just to get things off the ground. Trump's overrated peace plan helped enable the horrors in Israel and Gaza. How so? No American president caused Hamas's surprise assault across the Gaza border that killed over 900 Israelis, mostly in deliberate, brutal attacks on civilians, including 260 at a music festival and kidnapping about 150 more. But U.S. policy, especially the Trump administration's, contributed to the unsustainable situation that made an outbreak of violence more likely. And one more line that has its own paragraph here. Claims that, quote, Trump brought peace to the Middle East are almost an inversion of reality. I mean, well, they're just blank stupid. He didn't bring any peace to the, but as it happens, of course, there's now this awful conflagration. So it is, in fact, the opposite, but there was just nothing to base your claim of bringing peace on. So here's the excerpt that Greg has selected, and there's a couple of paragraphs to it here. Let's start with Trump's relatively most positive contribution, the Abraham Accords. You remember those. And we were just discussing them like 2 seconds ago. That deal normalized relations between Israel, Bahrain. Everyone has been clamoring for an end to the Israel-Bahrain war, right? The United Arab Emirates as well, UAE, opening flights that sent tourists to each other for the first time. So that's the big, fantastic development. The wealthy of Bahrain and the UAE can opt for a vacation on the Mediterranean and go to Eilat and, although, wait a minute, no, Ashkelon, right? And Eilat is Red Sea, I think. But anyway, and I guess they could have gone there. But I don't know, do the Saudis have, they must have resort towns there as well. But at any rate, the point is that they can go there, and then you can go to Doha and play golf if you're a wealthy Israeli now. That's the fun thing. More likely, you can hustle and sell them some surveillance apps. Anyway, all three of those countries are small, wealthy American partners that oppose Iran, making an agreement easier. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Navy's Central Command for the Fifth Fleet. The Trump administration greased the skids with UAE by authorizing F-35 fighter jet and Reaper drone sales, making them the only country in the Middle East besides Israel with advanced stealth aircraft. But whatever you think of that price, more peace is a positive development, well, if you could get it, and could provide a stepping stone for a wider Arab-Israeli deal, as the Biden administration has been attempting with Saudi Arabia. But lying about the Abraham Accords, stretching them into the dawn of a new Middle East, as it says here, enclosed in quotes, and playing them up for an American domestic audience was emblematic of Trump's larger failure. He threw America's weight behind Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's squeeze and ignore approach to the Palestinians, as if the fundamental problem of people displaced and living under occupation would just go away. I mean, that was essentially the biggest achievement of the Abraham Accords, was to get rich Gulf state governments to admit that they weren't going to jeopardize their own prosperity on behalf of the Palestinians anymore, if they ever did. I mean, that's honesty, so maybe that's a good development in that sense, but it's not when you say Middle East peace, we've said this from the beginning with the Abraham Accords. When you say you're going to work on Middle East peace, people are like, oh, you're going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And if you say, no, I'm just going to make it easier for wealthy people in the Middle East to do wealthy person things and leave the Palestinians to their fate, that's not Middle East peace. People think you're talking about Palestinians when you say I'm going to solve Middle East peace. I mean, there are other places at war that need solving in the Middle East, but that's what Americans are conditioned to think of, for 70 some years. That's the problem you're talking about when you're talking about Middle East peace. Oh, there are other problems, and they haven't solved those. But the point is, some people who weren't at war would like to be able to give each other some money, and I facilitated that. That's great. Anyway, yes, so Trump officially recognized Jerusalem, of course, as part of his Middle East policy, as Israel's capital, and moved the U.S. embassy there, breaking American policy since the 1979 Camp David Accords that treated the city as disputed, given Palestinian claims to a capital in East Jerusalem. Trump cut $25 million in U.S. support for Palestinian hospitals and $200 million from the UN Relief and Works Agency, which has helped displaced Palestinians and their descendants since 1949. In early 2020, Trump's son-in-law, you remember him, Jared Kushner, and White House advisor, Jared Kushner, put out a, quote, peace plan that mostly just proposed giving Israel what it wants and dismissing Palestinian concerns. Well, yeah, that's kind of what it was. And I think we had that right largely. Now, there's more to the article, but that's definitely the heart of it, according to Greg's reading. And perhaps we'll leave it at that for the day, just because otherwise, once again, we would be rightly consumed with the subject. I think it's fair enough to spend forever on it, but I don't know that I have that much more in the way of clarification for you. Although I will say, I think we called it correctly when we discussed it. Was it yesterday that we talked a little about the World Central Kitchen killings and how they would be received, and how, you had to be cautious about how they would be received. I think that's basically been the general tenor of things. People are shocked at this, and there are people who are becoming, I don't know what to say about it, but there are certainly people who are waking up to the gravity of the situation because of the people who were killed. And I think we pretty accurately pinpointed, yes, that's also problematic because, thousands and thousands of Palestinians have been being killed, and for some reason that didn't wake anybody up to it, but a bunch of Western relief workers who are, at bottom, attached to a celebrity chef who is doing remarkable work and probably deserves a Nobel Peace Prize well before he even did this work in Gaza. he is a celebrity. He is a chef. He first became famous that way, but he's done more amazing things than any of his cooking and restaurateurship, obviously. But okay, you could describe him that way. So it's a little bit unfair to say, well, okay, well, now the war is serious. Yeah, all right. And people have been doing a great job hedging about that and mentioning that. I'm just saying, I think we saw that accurately yesterday. But yeah, lots of reaction to the word coming out of the White House that Biden is visibly angered by this strike. And the Israelis are doing whatever the hell they can in that situation without actually giving up the war that they're clinging to and the desire to continue to prosecute it across the board in Israel. Some people for one end and others for a different end, but there's just not that much flat out opposition to the war going on in the Israeli population. So that's problematic too. But yes, and then people pointing out, well, so what? You're angry. Well, do something about it. And you can't disagree with the inclination to say, I need something concrete here. You're going to have to do something. Show me. Being angry about it isn't enough. And that's true. But I will say the presidency is a terrible place to be, quite honestly. I know a lot of people think you have all the power in the world, and in some ways you do. And in some other ways, you really are between a rock and a hard place. You can't say somebody is helpless in there or that there's nothing that they can do. But I don't know. I have found on the few occasions where I've been able to get some insight into what goes into decision making that doesn't always get discussed publicly, it's a terrible place. And sometimes the job is, I got to be the lightning rod here. I got to do the wrong thing and let everybody be pissed at me because of this hidden reason here. Sometimes the reason is true, but dumb. Sometimes it's wrong, false, but the right thing to do. Sometimes it's false and the wrong thing to do. There's the whole quadrant to take a look at. I'm thinking back to the opportunity I had to discuss detainee policy, for instance, torture policy, detainee policy, and warrantless surveillance policy. And we got to hold people in the previous administration, i.e. the George W. Bush administration, responsible for what they did when speaking about it with the Obama administration, in fact, with Obama. And it was very interesting and revealing to hear, well, look, I absolutely understand where you're going with this. And I absolutely agree that in a perfect world, we would do these things. But this is one of many moving parts here. And without giving away the game, i.e. telling you too much in the way of classified information for which you're authorized to hear none, I have to tell you, there's intelligence that tells us things that we can't share that makes it impossible for us to do the right thing on, for instance, in the certain detainee cases. We cannot bring a case against them in court because the evidence would jeopardize ongoing intelligence operations, and we cannot let them go because the intelligence we have on them is that they are absolutely, positively, 100% dedicated to making themselves a danger to American lives around the world the minute they're released. And yet we cannot prove this in court, but we have them in detention, and the best thing to do for the most number of people involved, in my opinion, not my opinion, but his opinion, was to continue to hold on to them, as disturbing as that is for legal purists. And it just sort of reminds you of the dynamics of a situation like this. And it's excuse making, absolutely, because I cannot prove any of it, and sometimes people would just not accept the excuse anyway. But my inkling here is that, the suggestion, why don't you just cut off Israeli weapons supplies, financial backing, diplomatic backing, what have you. My guess is that there's some kind of tremendously valuable and worrisome pipeline of intelligence coming from Israel, that a visible, public, and ugly break between governments here would end or jeopardize. I considered briefly the possibility, knowing, for instance, the weird relationship between India and Israel, that in India and the Modi government and the population, much of the population, some significant portion of the right-wing population anyway, are tremendous Israel supporters. And I gave some brief consideration to the possibility that there is private worry in the West that Israel could be courted by at least certain members of the BRICS coalition. But then you have to keep in mind that, well, one fairly significant member of the BRICS coalition, the S in BRICS, South Africa, who are currently suing Israel in the International Court of Justice. It wouldn't immediately jump out at you that, yes, they're looking for closer cooperation with Israel. On the other hand, the bigger names in BRICS, including the Chinese and the Russians, the R and the C there, have a different relationship with Israel. And, of course, so does India. And the Russians, who knows what kind of relationship they have with anybody or want with anybody. But nothing would please them more than a break between Israel and the United States in which they could insinuate themselves, either directly or through Russian-leaning Ukrainians, where there's a very strong relationship there between the Ukrainians and the Israelis, even though they're a little distracted right now themselves. But, on the other hand, also entering into the BRICS relationship is Iran, sort of making an attempt to join formally. They're now formalizing the BRICS relationship into an actual forum, and that wouldn't really suggest a great possibility for cooperation there with Israel either, and yet they wouldn't be driving the BRICS agenda, but also making attempts at entering the BRICS circle of influence are the Saudis, who now have the Abraham Accords to build on as well, and the Egyptians, who actually do have a peace agreement with Israel. I don't know. But what my big guess, though, is that there's some sort of extremely valuable flow. Well, there's a flow of intelligence about Middle Eastern and worldwide terrorist operations that are flowing from Israel. I was going to say very valuable, but this may be the sort of thing that only the intelligence community considers valuable, and either the rest of the public is unaware of or would disagree about the value of. And given the way Israel has applied its intelligence in its war fighting, I guess you could be very well justified in wondering about the actual value of that intelligence. But what they see and what they act on may be very different from what the United States sees and it acts on, and they view the product very differently. But I suppose if there was a threat, that if the pressure that people really wanted in America, really wanted to see exerted over Israel by the White House were to come to pass, I imagine that the intelligence community is warning the White House off furiously, saying, we're going to lose out on some really good intelligence that we're getting from the Israelis that have helped us prevent attacks around the world. It may or may not even be true. I don't know. It's hard to tell, especially when you're proving a negative on things like that. We've been preventing attacks. How do I know you've been preventing attacks? Well, they know what they know, and they know that we don't know what they know, and they could be telling us something less than the truth about it. But it could also be a factor behind the scenes, and no one would be able to tell us about it. That's just guessing, and it's excuse making, but it's real, and it sometimes happens, And sometimes the intelligence itself is actually real and helpful and valuable. And sometimes it's just a cover story. That's the nature of it. And the nature of the presidency in some cases is to stand there and take the slings and arrows so that the thing that you have been convinced is the path of least resistance, if not the best path, will actually work. Sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it's because the whole thing was a house of cards, and sometimes it's because, no, it was the best bet, but it was never 100% guarantee of safety around the world, and there's an actor out there that just cannot be prevented, and a thing happens, and then people point back and say, we didn't even get that safety measure that we thought we were supposed to get out of doing the wrong thing here. But yeah, a decision has to be made. And very often it's the role of the presidency to say, I am going to have to be somewhat unpopular for doing this, but I do feel like I have to do it, even if they're wrong in the end. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there as a consideration. It's not the answer. It's not backed by a tremendous amount of evidence. It can't be backed in many cases by evidence because the evidence is unknown to us or classified. But it is true, I think, and I think you'll probably recognize it as true, that very frequently things that seem inexplicable to us do in fact have explanations, even if they are bad, that can't be shared with us openly and frankly and honestly without a high degree of abstraction. And on top of it all, it's often not a conversation that is worth having especially in an emotionally charged atmosphere where people are going to just not want to hear it or not want to discuss it because of the real facts on the ground, the amount of death, the misery that's happening, and how can you not react to that emotionally? That's the correct type of response, but I don't know if it's the correct way for decision makers to respond, and that makes people angry. That's not how decision makers respond to things like this. I don't know. This is not baseless speculation. It is speculation, but it's not without basis. This has kind of marked our foreign policy decision-making process for the last 50 plus years, not just about Israel, but elsewhere. Doing business with bad guys has kind of, and lots of people protest that, and we shouldn't be doing that. But that's sort of a new isolationism if you really are going to try to exercise something like that. But realpolitik is that we do sometimes deal with bad guys, and you know that that's on the record. You know that that's been happening. So when I say it's not without basis that we speculate this way, I speculate this way. That's the basis. We've been involved with rotten people. And as the pressure ratchets up on Israel here in the United States, and we say, well, maybe we shouldn't be the closest ally of Israel around the world. We used to do it based on shared values and an approach to democracy, and say it was the only democratic state in the Middle East, and that's rapidly deteriorating. But then there must be something else. But then you remember we're close allies with lots of people who are absolutely not democracies in the Middle East. And we were just reading an article. Well, we have a new partnership, the new Middle East. There are Abraham Accords. The Saudis, Bahrainis, Qataris, the Emiratis. None of them are democracies. Furthest thing from it. But, as people have been pointing out for years and years and years, why are we close allies? It's a brutal dictatorship, and it's, because they share something with us. Intelligence, lots of money for the son-in-law of the president of the United States, whatever it may be. They find ways to supply that thing, which is valuable to administrations, both Democratic and Republican. And they know how to play that game, and they know that certain Republican administrations are more interested in bribes, and the Democratic administrations are going to be more interested in something governmental that we can point to. So, we do deal with bad people all the time. We just used to be able to say that Israel isn't the same kind of bad person, and now we're having more and more difficulty actually making that separation. But don't worry, because, well, I mean, do worry, but don't worry in terms of the conservatism of our continued approach to foreign policy in the Middle East, because we're well used to dealing with people who aren't democratic operators, but who nonetheless give us what we want in this region. So, I don't know. It's bad, but there's a lot more happening than just why don't you justism. That's always the case. All right, that's the commentary portion of today and the political science examination of the situation. There's more things to tell you, somewhat less depressing, I suppose, even though they will expose sore spots in our own American body politic. I guess before we hit the break, I guess I also will acknowledge the existence of a very interesting story. And I guess since we were talking about intelligence products, sometimes the intelligence products and the application of them, not particularly great in terms of, I don't know, morality, international law, whatever else. But I want to acknowledge the widely circulated article in 972 magazine. I think we've hit that as a source before. An Israeli publication, I guess rather progressive leaning, we might guess, based on what we've read from it anyway. I don't know how they lean overall, but a discussion of the Lavender program, application, system, I don't know what you would call it, but it's labeled here, the AI machine that is directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. Apparently, the subheader tells us, the Israeli army has marked tens of thousands of Gazans as suspects for assassination, presumably relationships with Hamas, using an AI targeting system with little human oversight and a permissive policy for casualties. Wonderful. AI directing a war. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think the decision will have to be, for the time being, I'm not going to run through the story on Lavender. I'll simply highlight the fact that it exists and provide it to you in today's roundup, and we can read it, and it might be something we want to parse through together at some point, but it looks like it's A, long and involved, and B, AI, I don't know. And of course, AI is very frequently, it's sold as a bill of goods. I don't know. I guess it doesn't do the things that people who promote it say it does, unless, of course, what you're saying it does is providing you with some sort of excuse for doing something terrible, which it seems to be pretty good at. And I don't, AI. Is it even AI? I don't know. They have a system. Look, they have a list of people that they think have connections to Hamas, and so therefore they want to kill them. I mean, and then if they say, let's kill everybody on this list, that's not AI. That's you deciding to kill a bunch of people. And, if the thing is, well, if it's supposed to shift blame, I didn't put them on the list. The AI put them on the list based on, based on what? Based on information that you fed into the database. And then you tried to teach it how to identify somebody you think has some a connection to Hamas. Well, if you can tell it the criteria, then it's going to tell you what you want to hear. Look at this. Everybody you put on this list actually has connections to Hamas. You should kill them. I don't think there's any AI going on, but, whatever it is, there's about 10,000 things tied up in this story that are bad news, and AI is just one of them. But because it's been passed around, because it's of interest, and because it has to do with this subject, I bring it up. It's an extraordinarily long-looking and complicated-looking article, and perhaps we'll all want to take a look at it and digest it separately. There are many other things going on. This country has a lot going on in it. This one, the United States of America. And let's talk about some of those things, even though some of them touch on other countries. It all does. We're involved everywhere. First of all, this really should have been top of the hour stuff. Should have been able to talk about it with Greg, but Greg's time was limited. I want to pat myself on the back. I want to pat you on the back, virtually, because we're right about stuff. And instead of the last half hour where we might be wrong, I might be wrong, totally wrong about things, let's talk about something I was right about. What do I always tell you? All right, well, what is one of the things that I always tell you? One of the things I always tell you is Trump and paperwork, man. It's not to be trusted. You would be shocked how often it would turn out if we actually just investigated everything Trump was doing whenever paperwork is involved. How frequently some of the terrible things that we thought had happened and we had to just live with now as a consequence of having Trump as our president at the time, or forever, because now he thinks he's immune from things. That if you examined the paperwork, you would say, maybe this never happened. I don't know. Maybe we could actually do something about this by undoing this thing. You would be shocked. But nobody is doing it because that's not something you do to the American presidency, because nobody would ever fake the paperwork for things. And so therefore it must really be true, as tragic as it is. Like, I keep pointing back to, did Donald J. Trump appoint 3 arch conservatives to the Supreme Court? History records that he did. But history records that he did because, I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But it looked like all the right things were going on, and the Senate believed it, and so therefore that's all that matters. And at some level, I guess that's true. But did he? And was the paperwork correct? And did he send correct note? I mean, there are people at the White House who are supposed to take care of these things, but they were Trump appointees. They might have been incompetent idiots, or they might have taken some shortcuts. I don't even know. I don't know. You don't know. I didn't see the paperwork. You didn't see the paperwork. Did someone inside the Senate who's used to seeing paperwork see paperwork that looked like the right paperwork? Probably. But then again, did people inside the Capitol on January 6th see paperwork that looked like the paperwork, but it was actually fake Electoral College certificates that looked like Electoral College certificates that they were hoping Mike Pence would read into the record? They had them. And if you forge that, I can't promise you that you didn't also have just some staff aide say, you know what, it's Amy Coney Barrett, and I'll put the auto pen to the paper here, and it'll look like Donald J. Trump made this appointment, and maybe he knew about it, maybe he didn't. I don't know. Trump's crazy. He may have said, you make the appointment, and make it look like I made the appointment, and tell me who it is, and I'll say they're great. Whatever it is, and and is that enough to be binding? Maybe it is. I don't know. But what I'm saying is always check, because you'll be surprised. Knee-jerk reaction to yesterday's story that Trump found some other sucker to put up the $175 million bond to enable his appeal of the New York civil fraud verdict to go forward. Right, the case that Judge Engeron was supervising. He lost the case. He was found civilly liable, and there was a judgment entered against him of $350-something million plus interest that made it $450-something million. And then he fought, and he had it reduced on appeal, and it was reduced to $175 million, and he still didn't have the money to pay that, but he found a sucker who wanted to put up the money, who had an insurance company, who has apparently put up bonds like this before and actually knew how to fill out paperwork, maybe, sort of, kind of, and filed the paperwork, and that's it. And the story was Trump posts bond. Trump didn't post bond. Hanke posted bond, but he posted bond for Trump. Now the whole thing can go forward. And what did I say yesterday? Without any basis, without any evidence that I knew of, I said, it's a maybe. You should check the paperwork. I say it was without evidence, sure, but without basis, no. It was with basis. All Trump paperwork is subject to forgery and fakery and corner cutting and mistakes and misunderstandings. Check everything. It's important. And to the extent that the paperwork determines whether or not something officially, really, honest to God, did happen, in such a way that the rest of the system will function as though it did, well, check that paperwork, because you might find out it didn't happen. But yesterday's story everybody had, based on evidence, Trump posts bond. Even though the evidence, like I said, the evidence is no, Hanky posts bond. But all right, you impute that to Trump because it's Trump's appeal that's supposed to go forward. So fine. It happened, right? Well, you reported that it did, but don't report that it did unless you check it, because you'll never know what you're going to find. But I said, based on only on past performance, double it, check it, triple check it, make sure that everything is correct, right down to the level of, is the notary public who attested to the work of the night insurance company that they used to post this bond really licensed? Is his license still current? It says it is, but is it? Look it up. Did he pay what he needed to pay? Is the person who purported to sign on behalf of Knight actually legitimately a member of the bar? Are they, in fact, the general counsel of that company? Everything you could look at should be looked at. Well, I know you think that's just you got Trump derangement syndrome. You just no. He's effed these things up before, and you might even acknowledge that. But you probably said still 90% sure that probably this idiot did in fact post bond. Well, no, he didn't. You're wrong. Ha! April Fools, everybody. The bond wasn't posted. I have a story for you. We were right. Trump and paperwork, man. It always trips him up. He cannot get this right. Even though yesterday we said, well, maybe he finally did get it right, because I looked and the notary public appears to be up on his paperwork, and this person appears to be the general counsel. On its face, it looks good, but just somebody with resources should check into it, because what you would have found had you done that, had you known everything you could possibly check about paperwork, and I didn't know that you could check this, but you could, you would have found out that something indeed did go wrong with all of this. And I have this story from Law and Crime, and guess who wrote it? Brandy Buckman wrote this thing. Now, it's based on somebody else's, look, some guy on Twitter said, look what I found. And, but you know, it's hard to read it as a Twitter thread. So let me read you the organized thoughts of Brandy Buckman on this one. How do you like this headline for today? Rejected and, quote, returned for correction. Docs, that is to say documents, not doctors, docs for Trump's $175 million bond get bounced. And what are documents but paperwork? Trump and paperwork, man. I'm telling you, you can never go wrong speculating wildly that something is wrong somewhere along the line with any paperwork that Trump had anything to do with anywhere along the line, even if it's just his name going on a building. Something wrong with that paperwork. He will not pay enough attention to get this thing done right, and no one around him has incentive to do so either. Mostly because they have been able to do it the easy and wrong way the whole time and get away with it anyway, even down to the level of judges saying, well, I don't know, it's too late now. It would be too disruptive to actually apply the law here and say that he doesn't own this building after all these years. I couldn't untangle the thing. We'll just say going forward he does own this building and fine. Here's the story. A review of the New York County Supreme Court docket on Wednesday shows that paperwork for former President Donald Trump's newly secured bond, no, not secured at all, bond of $175 million was temporarily rejected and, quote, returned for correction. Is this incurable? No. Will it be fixed fairly shortly? Probably, I guess. You never know. Trump has the capacity to F up anything. But for right now, under normal circumstances with normal lawyers and normal clients and normal actors being attached to all this stuff, people who are responsible and really want this thing to be squared away properly would fix it. But I don't know whether this group is capable of doing so. So just holding that out there as a possibility. The cause for the rejection, according to the New York County Supreme Court website, is, you'll love this one, because the requisite paperwork got effed up. Why? It lacked a current financial statement. What? I can't believe that Trump paperwork lacks a current financial statement, although it's not clear whose financial statement we need here. This was first noted by New York attorney Jeffrey Levine in a post on Twitter, and it is linked herein. I guess just for the purposes of reading you the actual initial tweet in all of this, Jeffrey Levine, who tweets as NY Advocate JKL. He's Jeffrey K. Levine, JKL. Not just kidding, Levine. That's what they call him. New York Advocate JKL says, breaking news. Court rejected Trump bond filing in Trump fraud verdict for several reasons, one of which was Trump failed to upload his, quote, current financial statement, unquote, to the court. Looking forward to reading is what he means here. 175 million reasons why one mistake should not have been made, much less 3. So it's not clear to me from this. Well, I don't know how much Jeffrey Levine knows about this. Is it Trump's financial statement that has to be uploaded, or is it Knight Insurance, and whoever's putting up the money has to attach I would think, a current financial statement to show, yeah, I've actually got it. I mean, remember in all of this, the most blatant, outrageous fraud of all that they could come up with in all of this is, what if this billionaire either isn't a billionaire, doesn't have this money, didn't move any money in any recognizable way such that, no, the bond shouldn't be recognized as actually valid? I don't know. There's a million things that could go wrong here, but you would think, okay, New York state courts would want to have some reliable indication that there was $175 million in escrow somewhere that they could snatch up and keep if the whole thing falls apart at some point, right? That's the idea of a bond. All that's moving is paper. They're not bringing $175,000 in cash, which would also be paper, but they're not bringing that to the office and saying, here, did I say thousands? $175 million in cash. I would love to see them try and do that. But it's all going to be on paper. It's all going to be about, my bank will tell you that they have, presumably you can trust them. They're licensed, whatever. They say there's $175 million in a vault somewhere, not really where it is, but that you can take this money if things go south. So that's a lot of paperwork that's going to have to happen there. So anyway, that's Jeff Levine's first spotting of it, and then everybody began writing about it, including Brandy, who says, so there's the missing financial statement. It's also missing, by the way, the name of his attorney in fact. That's how she's listing it here. Trump will have a chance to resubmit his request, and it might all get fixed, but it might get effed up again. Whose attorney in fact? Trump's, or again, Hankey's and Knight Insurance? Although it looked to me like there was a listing of the name, and what was it? Amit Shah or something like that was the general counsel for Knight. That name was there. Anyway, an attorney for the former president did not immediately respond to a request for comment from Law and Crime. As Law and Crime previously reported, Trump secured, kind of, maybe almost, a bond of $175 million, thanks to Knight Insurance Company of California. Owner Don Hankey was effusive in his praise of Trump after the bond secured, calling himself a supporter, but Hankey was less clear about whether Trump used bonds as collateral for the final amount. Hankey did not immediately return a request for comment. So there's a lot of financial proof that's necessary here. One, proof that Knight Insurance Company has and has set aside in a way that's accessible the $175 million. And then, of course, under normal circumstances, Knight Insurance Company, putting up the bond, would also say, all right, well, I don't want to just gift you $175 million. You have to show me that there's something I can recover if it does all go south and I end up losing this $175 million to the state of New York. What will I recover? But because it's Trump, it may very well be that, maybe I won't recover. And everybody has to learn this lesson, that everything Trump touches dies, and he will cost you all of that money, even as we speak. We were reminded just yesterday by Justice's hint to us that, the people who put together Trump media that has just had its IPO and is supposedly going to bring Donald Trump a $3 to $5 billion windfall in all of this, are themselves being pushed out and having their shares snatched away and maybe being bankrupted by the guy biting the hand that feeds them, Donald Trump. So, okay, look out for that. But, look for loan away, but watch out for in your ear. All right. Well, Hanky did not immediately return a request for comment because he doesn't want to give up the game this early either. Trump was, of course, fined $454 million for extensive civil fraud earlier this year. So you wouldn't expect that he would engage in further civil fraud by putting up this bond, would you? You would. Yeah. Well, you're a very smart person. So anyway, all of this, of course, the fines happened after he and his co-defendants at the Trump Organization were found guilty of wildly inflating the valuations of their real estate in order to secure sweetheart deals with insurers. What? And agreeable loan terms. So you're telling me that he was defrauding insurance companies this whole time, and now he owes $454 million, but he wants to appeal it, and yes, it got reduced to $175 million, but he doesn't have the money, and so he needs the money, and he went to an insurance company, and they said yes? Wow, that's weird, because you're insuring the good word of a guy who just got, found liable for defrauding insurance companies. But all right, you're into that. You're a masochist. Go for it. Trump had claimed for weeks that he was unable to secure bond on the full amount, while also claiming he had plenty of collateral and wealth to back it up. Historically, Trump has been notoriously close-fisted when it comes to access to his financial records, and that's a suggestion. That's the end of the article, actually, but also a suggestion that he might be just as close-fisted in providing financial statements either to Knight or to the court or whatever is required here. It's just not entirely clear, and I don't know if Jeffrey Levine has any more to say about it. It's nothing that's linked to that original tweet. I'll take a look at what he has going on in his profile and see if there's any further news about this thing. Nope, that's just sort of, he spotted it and then he didn't really develop the story any further, I don't think. But he's certainly speculating that there will be a lot to explain in the next couple days. And of course, remember that he had 10 days to post that bond, according to an order issued on March 25th. He was given 10 days to post that bond. I don't know whether this return for a correction extends that 10 days at all. We didn't know whether it was 10 business days or 10 calendar days. If it's 10 calendar days, he still has today, I think, to make that deadline if there's been no extension. But very frequently when the court finds that the paperwork is insufficient and returns it for correction, it comes with an extension, a number of days during which you have grace period to fix your paperwork if it's fixable. And it may not be. I don't know. I don't know how many days there are. And maybe there's something, because Jeffrey Levine here links, I think, to a Supreme Court document. No, he doesn't link directly to it, but perhaps others do. Maybe Brandy's article has a link to the actual docket. Yeah, here we are. The New York County Supreme Court docket on Wednesday. Let's see if we can link to the docket. Yeah, I guess so. And it opens it up. And, oh, look at that. That's interesting. So, okay, here we are. People of the State of New York by Letitia James, Attorney General, etc. versus Donald Trump et al. Active filing, but it doesn't have the direct link to the document, but it has all of the rest of them. Let's see, summons and complaint. No, yeah, so this goes all the way back. Is this in reverse? Well, this is in chronological order, probably. So let's see, all the way down the last. Let's see what's on the last page here. All the way down. Bond undertaking returned for correction, but there's no. Yeah, it doesn't show us any document that says anything about how long he's got to do it. So that's a mystery for the rest of the country to dig out, I guess, and await an answer on all of that. But anyway, for our purposes, it's just a validation of, yes, you always have to check the paperwork with him. And golly, will you be surprised every time. It's a very rewarding thing, actually. It's a great tip for reporters because you'll come up with a very interesting story that, well, actually, probably about 90% of the world doesn't do their paperwork right somewhere along the line. And depending on who you are, it's held against you or not held against you. If you're in a business world, they don't hold it against you. There's an entire body of work by David Dayen, astonishing body of work because of the astonishing happenings of people having their homes seized by alleged creditors who don't actually or are unable to produce paperwork because it doesn't exist very often. They just plain have it wrong or are lying, saying that they're the mortgage holder on these properties, and they're not. And courts just are like, well, you wouldn't just come in here and foreclose on a house that you didn't hold the deed to, right? Yeah, actually, they did do that. Well, but no. That's not the way it works. Well, it's the way it's happening right in here. Well, it would be so disruptive to try to undo this that it's better to just let it go forward at this point. What? But yes, astonishingly enough, that does happen. Meanwhile, up in Pennsylvania, of course, 10,000 voters are having their ballots thrown out because they made a paperwork mistake. But it's very easy to hold them accountable for the mistake by just simply saying, well, I won't count their votes, especially if it doesn't actually change the outcome of the election. It's very easy to do. But, on the very complicated side, oh my God, how are we going to unwind this mortgage situation if it turns out that there's massive lying and fraud going on? Never mind. Don't do it. Just pretend it was all on the up and up. What's the difference? The debtor wasn't making payments. They deserve to lose their house sometimes. Sometimes they were making payments, and that's problematic. But in the long run, if a particular individual goes bankrupt, nothing's going to change. But if a large bank, a mortgage holder goes bankrupt or is held liable and has to spend all of its money unwinding all of this stuff and everything is thrown into chaos, that's troublesome. So let's not do that. Yeah, that's actually happening out there as well. So, and if the president of the United States, and it's delaying his trial because it turns out that all of the things that he's been filing that enable him to continue his appeal aren't true and it'll just make it all worse. Why don't go ahead and have the appeal? Just go ahead. Forget it. Never mind. And he benefits from that. The rest of you don't. You lose your house. You lose your vote. Too bad. You're not a rich person. The end. So what else is happening in the world? There's an awful lot. Let's see. Newsweek, by the way, let me just throw this in. They also covered the mistake, maybe, if it is one, in the filing of his bond. And they have a slightly different take on it. Donald Trump forced to reveal his finances to save his properties. Their writer over at Newsweek, and, it's never entirely clear whether Newsweek writers these days, it's not what it used to be. Do they know what they're talking about? John Jackson, the associate editor, you would think he would, but like I said, Newsweek isn't what it used to be. Documents for Donald Trump's $175 million bond in his New York civil fraud case were rejected by a court because a current financial statement was not included. I don't know whose statement has to be in there. Newsweek now seems to think that there has to be a Trump financial statement in there. Maybe. He is, after all, the defendant. It's not crazy to require his financial statement, but I think the more important one would be the Knight Insurance financial statement. On Wednesday, a message on the New York State Supreme Court's electronic filing system showed Trump's bond/undertaking had been, quote, returned for correction. The New York State Supreme Court Justice Arthur Engoron ruled in February, of course, against Trump, his two eldest sons. You know all of that background. $175 million bond supposedly posted on Monday. but not correctly, and so therefore here we are. Newsweek reached out to Trump Representative Stephen Chung by email, as it turns out, for comment on the document's rejection, and I guess they didn't get anything. But by the way, there's some interesting news I can share with you about Stephen Chung. Anyway, then they cite Jeffrey Levine's tweet about it. I don't know. So they seem to think that Trump's going to have to file a financial statement, and that's how he got himself in trouble in the first place. So, Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, there's more reporting, and it's from Newsweek, and so, whatever. But there's some more detail available now. I was wondering what kind of updates we might have had overnight. There's a separate article here entitled, Donald Trump's $175 million bond rejection raises questions. Yeah, it does. This one published this morning and written by Sean O'Driscoll, senior crime and courts reporter. And we'll skip over some of the recounting of the background here, but this is of interest. So Trump's problematic $175 million bond to cover his New York civil fraud appeal has raised questions about what exactly led to the rejection of his insurer's paperwork, says a legal analyst. The Trump Organization's court-appointed monitor, Barbara Jones, likely has all the answer, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin wrote on Twitter. I can think of a courtroom full of journalists, as well as a bunch of lawyers in the New York Attorney General's office, who would love to know what Barbara Jones presumably knows right now, Rubin said. Of course, on Wednesday, the message on New York State Supreme Court's electronic filing system showed that Trump's bond/undertaking had been returned for correction. You know the background of how it is that he comes to owe the bond, so we can skip that part. And then we are reminded that Engoron appointed retired Judge Barbara Jones to monitor Trump's parent company, the Trump Organization, to ensure that it does not engage in any more fraud. It's too late, of course, to stop all the fraud that happened, but they are imposing a penalty for all of that, $454 million worth, now reduced to $175 in terms of bond. But on Monday, the former president's insurer, and it's not really his insurer, it's just an insurer that supports the political Trump, who decided that they wanted to help him out, who stepped in to become his insurer. But the former president's insurer posted that $175 million bond in the case, allegedly, ensuring that James does not seize any of Trump's assets or bank accounts during his appeal of Engoron's judgment against the Trump Organization. Now, Rubin pointed out that the court has rejected the paperwork of the insurance company that posted the bond for Trump. Insurance companies routinely provide court bonds for a fee. I don't know whether they've ever really, whether the Knight Insurance company has ever posted such a bond. But my assumption was that they could figure out how it was supposed to be done and do it correctly. I mean, I assumed that in all of this, it's more likely that Trump screwed up paperwork and that the insurance company has perhaps done this before and so therefore knows what they're doing. It looks on the surface like they do, but beware. And lo and behold, it did sort of look on the surface like they did, but I guess because I don't know anything about what's supposed to be attached to one of these bond filings. People who do know what's supposed to be attached to one of these bond filings said, hey, these things that are supposed to be attached to the bond filings aren't here. This paperwork looks like paperwork, maybe even correct paperwork for a bond filing, but there's other stuff here and it's missing, and you have to have a trained eye. I mean, you have to be trained to know that there's supposed to be an attachment, for instance. And if there's no attachment, it doesn't take any training to notice, well, if there's no attachment, that's a problem. But you have to be the person, who has access to that filing. And they did. And they said, it's not here. And that is a problem. The financial statement that is missing does not seem to be Trump's, according to Rubin's tweeting. Rather, the court appears to be demanding these documents from Knight Specialty Insurance Company to ensure that the company is sufficiently capitalized and authorized to post the bond, Rubin wrote on Wednesday. Essentially, yeah, that's the paperwork. This group says, we're posting the bond for Trump. Well, are you authorized to do so? Maybe. Show me the paperwork that says you're authorized to do so. Are you sufficiently capitalized? Do you really have $175 million to put up here? Maybe. Well, show me your financial statement so that I can be sure of that. Well, about that. I guess they just didn't do it. Meanwhile, we still don't know what fee Trump paid for the bond or exactly what collateral he pledged, Rubin added. But you know who likely does have all those details? Retired federal judge Barbara Jones, the court-appointed monitor in the case. Under a March 21st order from this year, the Trump Organization must give her advanced notice of their efforts to secure surety bonds. Details of Trump's bond may be included in Jones's future reports to Judge Engoron on the financial status of the Trump Organization, if she has that information. Of course, if she doesn't, then the bond should be just flat no good. Forget return for correction. She's supposed to get advance notice of the Trump Organization's efforts to secure a bond. Did she get it? If she didn't, is there a bond? I don't know. This might be one of those situations where it's like, no, technically he doesn't, but it would be so disruptive to just say, yeah, he failed to post the bond, just seize all his assets now, that they'll go out of their way to say, well, let's constructively say that he had given us notice. Newsweek, of course, sought email comments from Knight Specialty Insurance on Thursday. The court would likely reject Trump's bond if the paperwork is not corrected. That would mean Trump would lose his right to appeal Engoron's fraud judgment, and the $454 million would be due. Attorney Tristan Snell, author of Taking Down Trump, about his experience suing Trump on behalf of students of the failed Trump University, noted that the insurance paperwork has been returned for correction. The court demands that the bond underwriter, Knight Insurance, provide more info about their own solvency and authorization to cover the bond. Is there something else shady in how Trump's bond is being handled? Snell, I guess, speculated, wondered to aloud anyway, on Twitter on Wednesday. Wednesday's New York County Supreme Court notice read, the court has returned the documents listed below for the following reasons. Please include a current financial statement and power of attorney. That is, you, Knight Insurance. Show us that you have the $175 million so that we can trust you, and show us that you have been granted power of attorney to act on Trump's behalf. Additionally, please list the names of the attorney in fact under the signature line on the undertaking. Please use the refile document link for document number 1707, the problematic document, to resubmit the corrected filing. Thank you and have a great day. That's pretty good. So now we have a pretty clear idea of what's missing and whose responsibility it is. And to no one's surprise, except for the fact that they're apparently an operating insurance company and still can't get this right, people who have stepped in to help Trump are just as incompetent as Donald Trump ever was. I thought that this was something that they might be able to get worked out correctly, because every once in a while, Donald Trump is bailed out of his incompetence by having someone who knows what they're doing step in and cover for him. But every so often, one of the people who steps in and covers for him doesn't really know what they're doing. I have lots of money, so I think I know what I'm doing, but I don't. And maybe I have never known what I was doing, but because I have so much money and it would be so disruptive to tell me that I actually have to follow the rules, courts have let me get away with, what have they been? Well, how would you describe it, Greg?
That's bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. He's been getting away with that kind of crap since forever, and maybe I should just be able to continue to get away with it. And I don't know whether that's the assumption they made or just I think I've been right the whole time. My lawyers have headaches all the time, but I don't. I go and play golf, and I just continue to run around being rich. Maybe that's all that's happening here. All right. Well, that was interesting. What an episode. Is there any other reporting on? I mean, actually, I had to just Google search this morning. What's going on? Let's see. There's a couple other stories about it, but I think that kind of covers it. We'll just have to keep checking in to see whether anybody has corrected anything, and no word still on how long they have to get this right. So I don't know, maybe a little bit of additional examination. By the way, I mentioned to you that I had something that I could share with you about Stephen Chung. I'll just note for the record that fan of the show and frequent correspondent Jeremy Freiberger has sent me a link to a New Yorker story about Stephen Chung, and it's interesting. He was just saying, how you like to put a face with a name? You're going to love this one. So this is a profile of Stephen Chung by the New Yorker, Claire Malone, the face of Donald Trump's deceptively savvy media strategy. Is it savvy? I don't know. But the thing is, you might not have guessed exactly. You might not have had the right mental picture of what Stephen Chung looks like. It's actually pretty astonishing, I guess. And we'll say this, I guess it's about as close to looking like Odd Job from the 007 movies as you could get without, you might say, well, now are you being ridiculously racist? Well, I mean, this is, no, this is what he looks like. It's really rather amazing. And in fact, without getting into all the details of this guy's bio here, he is apparently, he used to be a Twitter guy, and I guess this is kind of how he got the job. He was just a big defender of Trump on Twitter, and they said, we should have this guy come in here. He was California Panda back in the day on Twitter, before they brought him in. And as other people say, well, he's kind of like that. Matthew Boyle, Breitbart's Washington bureau chief, it is said, refers to Chung's former account, California Panda. He's big, fluffy, and lovable. Chung, who grew up in Sacramento, the son of Chinese immigrants, is 41, broad, that's one way of putting it, bespectacled, although in the picture here he's not wearing any glasses, and bald. Trump when they say broad, Trump reportedly refers to him, he has a nickname for him, my sumo wrestler, which of course, he's not Japanese, he's Chinese. And all that we can say about him is that he's a large man. Sumo wrestler, whatever, man. I don't know what to tell you. Trump he is who he is. A reporter who covers the Trump campaign for mainstream news, a mainstream news outlet, told me, the writer Claire Malone for The New Yorker, He's not a white nationalist. He gets back to you. He gets you statements. So he's enjoying something like the Hope Hicks aura. He's competent enough to return people's calls, and he doesn't give off the vibe of being a white nationalist. I think he does. It's just that, well, he's not white, so I guess maybe, but there's plenty of non-white white nationalists out there. This era has taught us that much. But maybe he's just not like that. He's just a super Trump fan. But I don't know how you could be a super Trump fan and prop him up without also saying you're kind of okay with white nationalism. I think that you maybe can't. So anyway, wow. That's kind of interesting. And maybe you want to take a look. It's behind a paywall, I think, the New Yorker's stuff. But you might be able to break your way through to read about him. But, yeah, I don't think the faith in this guy is justified. I've read some of his statements. I wouldn't have any faith in him either. But it is interesting to put a face to a name. There's no doubt about that. Oh, by the way, I also got an email yesterday from, let's see, scroll back and find it. Here we are. Morris Smith, who sent me this note as we were commenting yesterday about the supposed Republican effort, and we don't even know if this is the right methodology, for renaming Dulles Airport and trying to, needle everybody else in the world, including just people who just have to fly through the place, by changing the name of Dulles International Airport to Donald Trump Airport. Now, normally we name things like this after people who are dead, and I'm in favor of that intermediate step. But I don't know about the naming. But we should, we shouldn't jump the gun. Unless, of course, it's not jumping the gun and the people who are making this effort know something we don't about Trump's days and how numbered they really are. But I don't think so. They just intend to do it while he's alive, and, they love breaking precedent. But I don't know if it's something that they can really do. I don't know if it's something that can be done by fiat from Congress. That's not clear to me either. Though they might be able to leverage some sort of, or exercise some sort of leverage against the people who do have the authority to rename. Anyway, what I had said was, remember, of course, that they renamed National Airport Reagan National Airport. And then I said maybe that was easier, one, because of who Reagan was versus who Trump is. I mean, whatever. And then two, National Airport, it was easier to rename because it wasn't named after anybody. It was just National Airport. Well, Morris points out, au contraire, National Airport is named after someone, and a president to boot. It is true that the name of the airport prior to the name change was Washington National Airport. Now, is that splitting hairs? Is it named after George Washington? It's not George Washington National Airport. It's Washington National Airport. So, pedants might say, and they might be right, that the airport is named after the place, Washington, D.C., but of course, Washington, D.C., the place, is named after Washington, the man. So there is that. Although I don't mean to assume gender, but I think he probably would have told you that his pronouns were he, him. Okay. I'm just guessing, though. Can't speak for, values were different then. We don't know. You might say, well, he was obviously a rather conservative actor. Of course, he was throwing off the chains of loyalty to a crown, and that wasn't exactly a conservative thing to do. But then he was a slaveholder. But then on the other hand, this, that, and the other thing. And on the other hand, he did attack Trenton on Christmas Day. So I don't know how Christian, something, blah, blah, blah. Just pointing that out. Anyway, it's a theory that Morris has going here, and it's a good one, right? Let's say it's named after the city. Why is the city named what it is, right? But it's a good point. Maybe, how about that? I wonder if that would have stood in the way. Of course, now they just say, do they say Washington Reagan National Airport? Because that's where the airport is. And by the way, it is not in Washington, of course. That's restricted airspace. You can't land a jet in Washington, D.C. But It is physically in Virginia, although I think they've given it a Washington zip code, and there's some sort of legal yada yada mumbo jumbo that makes it technically part of Washington, D.C., even though it's physically a part. But how about that? That's a good point. It is named for Washington. Would it have affected things? Did people argue at the time? You're going to rename an airport that's named after George Washington? How dare you? Well, they loved their Reagan, and they were willing to do anything to get that done, especially if it was, even then, going to needle liberals. And besides which, it should be, I think, named after George Washington. This really was a travesty. We all know that George Washington, commander of the Continental Army, and we know what the Continental Army did vis-a-vis airports, according to the very person who they're working to rename Dulles Airport. Curiously enough, after him, he told us he was the one who made us all aware. After 200 years plus of being mistaken about this, we now know, thanks to Donald Trump, that the Continental Army did take over the airports after ramming the ramparts. And of course, that was just one task among the many things that they needed to do. They did whatever they had to do in 1776 and beyond. They rammed the ramparts, took over the airports. They did whatever they had to do to win that war. And so I think it would be, now looking back on it, it's even a greater travesty to have renamed Reagan or renamed Washington's airport for Ronald Reagan, and it could only make things worse. Although I guess, ironically, you could say, well, maybe it makes things better. By naming Dulles Airport after the person who corrected our wrongness about Washington taking over the airports, it finally sets things right. Of course, that is incorrect and wrong and only makes things worse. Okay. So I just thought I would tell you about that thing. And while I'm talking about email, I can share with you, I have frequently lamented that I have not been able to share as much of Brian Beutler's insights on the show as we used to since he took his writings behind the paywall in his off-message Substack-ish, if not actual Substack, but I'm not positive about this, online newsletter. However, our good friend and correspondent and supporter of the show, Gil Aquino, who has happily volunteered use of his subscription to Brian Beutler's newsletter to share with us as a gift link, at least this one time, something that he feels was important to put on the record. And almost anything Brian has to say is probably relevant to our discussions on any given day. We haven't been much discussing Putin this day, but he's always on our mind, and Gil thought this one was particularly important. I always agree, and I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to read what Brian has on his mind. Trump did collusion and is also a fascist, even if Democrats can be pretty lame sometimes, and I think a good reminder of the overarching themes in this upcoming election. An analogy that might shed some light on why the "is Trump a fascist?" debate is so tedious and interminable. Always a question on our minds. Let's see what he has to say. In 2016, the Russian Federation engaged in an extensive, coordinated campaign of cyber crimes to help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton and become president of the United States. It's still out there. Okay. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller, the Republican special counsel, I say it again, who was appointed in 2017 by a Republican Deputy Attorney General at the behest of Republican leaders in Congress, who also were caught on tape saying they wanted so desperately to cover it all up, found that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systemic fashion, using a social media campaign that favored presidential candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaged presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, and computer intrusion operations against entities, employees, and volunteers working on the Clinton campaign. All of that, a quote except for the word using somehow in the middle of all that. Mueller, quote, again, identified numerous links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, unquote, and, quote, just trying to be careful here, established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian efforts, unquote. A later, even more thorough bipartisan investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, spearheaded by its then chairman, the Republican Richard Burr, established facts that Mueller had not. Among them, Trump's campaign chief, Paul Manafort's Kremlin-connected point man, with whom he shared sensitive campaign data, was in fact a Russian spy. That sounds bad. Several Trump operatives were tried and convicted for their conduct adjacent to the Russian interference and for trying to obstruct Mueller's investigation. The man who stymied Mueller most aggressively was Trump himself, who, by dint of being president, and I would put that in quotes, but Brian didn't, couldn't be charged with, or, in Mueller's thinking, even accused of, criminal obstruction. But the evidentiary record was clear. Trump tried to terminate the investigation, solicited document destruction, and dangled and eventually supplied pardons to witnesses and targets to secure their silence or lies. In part, as a result of this obstruction, Mueller did not believe that he could sustain a criminal conspiracy case against Trump or members of his campaign, where he'd have to overcome an exceptionally high burden of proof. But the evidence of cooperation, or collusion, as it came to be called in the discourse, was voluminous. Not only did Mueller uncover contacts and inducements that were unknown to the public before his appointment, Trump himself openly solicited intervention. Russia, if you're listening, you remember that, and would go on to both defend soliciting foreign interference in U.S. elections and request and extort it from other governments ahead of the 2020 election. But for Trump and many strange bedfellows, the story ended with Mueller's determination that a Trump-Russia conspiracy could not be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Trump, with help from his loyalist attorney general, insisted falsely that the investigation found no collusion, no obstruction. They cowed Democrats in Congress into turning the page on the Russia matter, and Trump has thus faced minimal accountability for what is, by the lights of Republican investigators, an outrageous scandal. Trump continues to be thick with shady Russian figures. Well, he's going to be thick no matter what, but okay. And in thrall to other kleptocrats, and now even more of them as they attempt, anyway, to post bond on his behalf. A man his team connected with federal investigators was just indicted for lying to the FBI to frame Joe Biden, seemingly at the behest of his colleagues in Russian intelligence. By contrast, a Trump-directed effort to find criminal behavior within the Russia investigation itself, and thus to discredit it, flopped embarrassingly. In spite of all this, some of Trump's most vocal defenders on the Russia question are leading lights of the American left. The Russia scandal was a gateway for many leftists into anti-Trumpism because it threatened one of their highest priorities. Oh, and now I've realized that I've hit the paywall of this thing that I thought came through in its entirety in Gil's email. Maybe go back to the email and see if I can open it there and see the rest of it. Though, as it happens, we also are out of time. So let's see. The rest of this appears to be here, though. Thankfully, it did work in the email. So let me read a little bit more on the way out here. The Russ, like as in Russia, to judgment. The Russia scandal was a gateway for many leftists into anti-Trumpism because it threatened one of their highest priorities. For obvious and in some cases justifiable reasons, they wanted conventional wisdom to attribute Clinton's defeat entirely to her agenda and her rhetorical appeals, and their roots in liberalism, or worse, neoliberalism. Yikes, that probably deserves dramatic music, but you can imagine it, and it's also time to play our outro music here. Left-wing critics came to view Russia as a shorthand for saying Trump won by cheating, which they naturally interpreted as a backhanded way of absolving Clinton and the Democratic establishment for a mix of real and imagined political and policy errors. Less generously, they wanted the lesson Democrats drew from Clinton's defeat to be radical, to culminate in a purge of the party's elites and its reinvention as a social democratic party in the mold of Bernie Sanders. Russiagate thus needed to be discredited, and who did that mean forming a rhetorical alliance with? Yep, that's right. As it happens, there are very good left-wing and progressive reasons to organize resistance against an international consortium, of right-wing kleptocrats collaborating in efforts to burgle their way into power. This should honestly be self-evident. And if anti-corporatism as a valid expression of left-wing thought, anti-Kremlinism should be too. Unless state-based dictatorial forms of oligarchy are deserving of a pass for reasons that go unstated. If Trump brings fascism or Putinism or even just Orbanism to the United States, it'll set back left-wing causes for at least a generation at a time when many on the left fear we have much less than a generation to spare, e.g., the accumulation of climate emissions fully wrecks the planet before this happens. Okay, well, yes, I flubbed that last sentence, but please forgive me. There's more, too.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And perhaps we can return to some of that tomorrow, now that we know that the rest of the balance of this thing is available to us. And we'll be having the general cleaning out of Pocket happening on Friday as usual. Stay tuned now for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, rounding up, all the things that I passed so easily by.